Imagine a world where natural resources are more valuable than gold itself. Now think of a country devastated by war, but which hides in its basement one of the greatest mineral riches on the planet. This country is Ukraine, and its rare mineral deposits are at the center of a fierce dispute among the largest global powers. In recent years, the war in Ukraine has become one of the greatest geopolitical challenges of the century. The conflict, which began with the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 and climbed to a large-scale invasion in 2022, changed the balance of power in Europe and the world. The West, led by the United States and its NATO allies, provided billions of dollars in military and humanitarian aid to Kiev. But war is far from a definitive resolution. At the center of this dispute are not only territorial issues, but also the strategic natural resources of Ukraine. The country has some of the largest rare mineral reserves in the world, including graphite, titanium, lithium and rare lands, essential to the technological industry, the energy transition, and the production of military equipment. These materials are fundamental for electric vehicle batteries, computer chips, wind turbines, and even advanced defense systems. The relevance of these resources to the global economy has placed Ukraine in a strategic position in commercial disputes between the great powers. The United States, who seek to reduce its dependence on China in obtaining these materials, see in Ukraine a viable alternative. On the other hand, Russia controls most of the territories rich in minerals, and its dominion over these areas could give Moscow an even greater commercial and diplomatic advantage. Recently, Washington and Kiev were dealing with an agreement for the United States to obtain access to these minerals in exchange for investments for the reconstruction of Ukraine. This agreement, however, generated intense debates and was a cause for tension between Presidents Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky, even before the US government transition. Now, with Donald Trump back to the White House, the American approach has changed dramatically. Trump has adopted a different posture compared to Ukraine. Since his election campaign, he has said he wishes to reduce US spending on Kiev's support and to press European allies to assume a greater portion of this responsibility. His pragmatic view of Ukrainian mineral resources is reflected in the interest in closing an economic agreement that directly benefits the United States, even if this implies less favorable conditions for Kiev. With this new American approach, the European Union also entered the game, offering Ukraine an alternative. Brussels proposed an agreement that, according to its leaders, would not require severe Kiev concessions and guarantee mutual benefits for both parties. This movement represents an attempt by Europe to reinforce its influence and prevent the US or Russia from taking control over Ukraine's strategic resources. Given this scenario, Ukraine finds itself in a delicate position, accepting an agreement with the United States, seeking support from the European Union, or insisting on more guarantees before any negotiation. This geopolitical dilemma puts Zelensky in a crossroads, where any decision can define the future of war, the Ukrainian economy, and even global stability. A diplomatic meeting that should seal one of the biggest strategic agreements of the decade quickly became one of the most tense moments between the United States and Ukraine. What began as a meeting to discuss the future of Ukrainian rare minerals ended with Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky in a direct clash, leaving the whole world on alert. Trump and Zelensky were expected to finalize a historical agreement that would give the United States access to Ukraine's vast mineral reserves. In return, Americans would offer financial and technological support for the reconstruction of the country. Devastated by war, But the negotiations took an unexpected course when Trump, visibly impatient, criticized Zelensky for playing with World War I and not showing enough gratitude for American support. The situation worsened when US Vice President J.D. Vance joined the discussion, wondering if Zelensky really valued the military and financial support received from the United States since the beginning of the war. The Ukrainian leader, in turn, tried to defend his position, arguing that, in addition to economic support, Ukraine needed concrete security guarantees to avoid further Russian attacks in the future. For him, an agreement without solid military protection could make the country vulnerable to more aggressions. However, Trump made it clear that his priority was to close an advantageous trade agreement for the United States and not guarantee prolonged military commitments. For him, European allies should assume more responsibilities in the defense of Ukraine, while the US should focus on an economic return on the billions of dollars already sent to Kiev. The weather got even heavier when Zelensky rejected the terms presented and insisted that he would not sign anything without a reinforced security clause. The tension climbed to the point that the meeting ended earlier than expected, with Zelensky leaving the White House without signing the long-awaited agreement. Shortly thereafter, Trump made a point of reinforcing his position on social networks, stating that Zelensky disrespected the United States and would only negotiate when the Ukrainian president was ready for peace. These statements quickly spread, generating immediate reactions worldwide and raising the big question: what will be the next step of Ukraine now that its greatest ally seems hesitant to continue unconditional support? While the impasse between Trump and Zelensky generated uncertainties about the future of the partnership between the two countries, one factor remained clear. The rare minerals of Ukraine are a key piece on the global geopolitical board. The largest powers in the world, including the United States, the European Union, and Russia itself, know that control of these resources can redefine strategic supply chains, especially in sectors such as technology, energy, and defense. The American proposal, negotiated before the White House, provided for a billionaire agreement in which the US would have privileged access to Ukrainian mineral reserves. On the other hand, Washington would create a reconstruction fund to help Ukraine recover from the war. This fund would be managed by both countries, with a significant participation of US and Ukrainian investors. However, the point of disagreement was not only in economic terms, but also in security guarantees. Zelensky insisted that any agreement should include a clear military protection clause against future Russian aggressions. He argued that without this commitment, the exploitation of mineral resources could even become a risk to Ukraine, making the country even more vulnerable to attacks. On the other hand, Trump made it clear that his priority was to ensure an economic return to the United States, minimizing new military commitments. He repeatedly stated that European countries should assume most of their responsibility for Ukrainian security, and that their focus was to protect Americans' financial interests. With the failure of negotiations in Washington, the European Union saw an opportunity to act. A few days after the White House meeting, European leaders presented an alternative proposal to Ukraine. European Commissioner Stéphane Séjourné stated that Europe was willing to guarantee a trade agreement that would not require severe Kiev concessions. The promise was a partnership based on mutual benefits, avoiding the strict terms imposed by the US. The European offer had its advantages. The European Union is already Ukraine's largest commercial partner, as well as being a strong advocate of its future adherence to the bloc. An agreement in this sector could strengthen the bonds between Kiev and Brussels, aligning Ukraine even more with European economic and regulatory standards. On the other hand, this proposal also raises strategic issues. The European Union, despite its economic influence, does not have the same military capacity as the United States. Ukraine's safety still depends in much of NATO support and Western military commitments. Without a solid support in this regard, only economic agreement may not be sufficient to ensure the country's stability. With two proposals on the table, one American focused on financial return and another European with a more cooperative tone, Ukraine is faced with a crucial choice. Zelensky's decision will not only be about trade, but which geopolitical path Ukraine wishes to follow in the future. The tension between Trump and Zelensky did not go unnoticed. As soon as the news about the failure of negotiations spread, global leaders began to position themselves. The impact of this impasse was not only limited to relations between the United States and Ukraine, but also affected the balance of power in Europe and NATO. In the European Union, the reaction was immediate. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron expressed concern about the US posture and reinforced the need for continuous support for Ukraine. The European Union's proposal for an alternative mineral agreement was rapidly highlighted as a more stable and reliable solution than the American proposal, which was at risk after meeting at the White House. The United Kingdom also demonstrated support for Ukraine, with the British Prime Minister stating that war cannot be resolved solely by economic interests and that safety guarantees should continue to be a priority. NATO, in turn, reaffirmed its commitment to Ukrainian defense, regardless of the position of the United States. However, the biggest concern among Western allies was the possibility of Trump weakening Ukraine's support at a critical moment. The decision to suspend part of military aid until a new agreement was signed generated uncertainties about the future of the conflict. This led countries such as Poland and the Baltic states to reinforce their own Kiev support initiatives, fearing US hesitation could give Russia advantage. And speaking of Russia, Vladimir Putin wasted no time to explore the situation. Kremlin immediately reacted to a failed meeting between Trump and Zelensky, classifying it as a division sign among the Western allies. Russian authorities suggested that Ukraine was getting isolated and that its government should consider realistic alternatives to end the conflict, an indirect reference to a possible peace agreement under Moscow's terms. In addition, reports arose that Russia would have offered to the United States a proposal to negotiate access to strategic minerals located in Ukrainian territories occupied by Russian forces. The idea that Washington could consider such an offer, even remotely, has concerned the European allies further and increased the pressure on Trump. China also observed the developments closely. Beijing, which already has a strong influence on the global rare mineral market, sees any change in the control of these raw materials as a potential threat to their interests. The Chinese government has reinforced its position of public neutrality. But experts point out that the failure of negotiation between US and Ukraine can further strengthen Chinese rule over this sector. While allies tried to contain the damage and opponents took advantage of the situation, Ukraine faced an even greater dilemma: how to ensure its political and military survival amid a scenario where US support no longer seems so unconditional. The diplomatic crisis between the United States and Ukraine has exposed a problem that Kiev had already been facing behind the scenes: uncertainty about the future of his international support. Since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has received billions of dollars in Western military and humanitarian aid. But now, the main source of this support, the US, demonstrates signs of hesitation. Trump's decision to condition American support on an economic agreement creates a dangerous dilemma for Ukraine. With no security guarantees, Zelensky fears that his country is vulnerable to future Russian attacks. On the other hand, without a solid financial agreement, Ukraine may have difficulty reconstructing its economy and maintaining the war effort. Another worrying factor is that most of Ukraine's mineral reserves are located in areas currently occupied by Russia or near conflict zones. Even though an agreement was signed, the exploitation of these resources would depend on territorial recovery and extensive work of demining, which would take years to be completed. In addition, the hesitation of the United States may lead other allies to reconsider their own commitments to Ukraine. Although the European Union offered an economic alternative, the lack of military support comparable to the US is still a problem. Without American support, Ukraine may face difficulties in maintaining its defense in the long run. Internally, the situation also complicates Zelensky's political position. Your government needs to demonstrate concrete results to maintain popular support and stability within the country. The lack of progress in negotiations can generate discontent between military, entrepreneurs, and the civilian population, which already faces the devastating impacts of the war. At the same time, Russia sees this fragility as an opportunity. Putin can increase military or diplomatic pressure on Kiev, betting that Ukraine will be increasingly isolated. If the West does not react with a firm commitment, Moscow may try to negotiate a ceasefire in favorable terms for Russia, which would be a blow to Ukrainian sovereignty. Given this scenario, Ukraine needs to act quickly to ensure that it is not without strategic allies. Whether renegotiating with the United States, strengthening their ties with the European Union, or seeking support from other partners, Kiev cannot afford to waste time. War continues, and lack of support can mean the difference between resisting or giving in to Russian pressures. The failure of the negotiations between Trump and Zelensky has exposed a harsh reality. War in Ukraine is not only a military conflict, but also a political and economic battle where each movement can redefine global alliances and interests. The impasse in the White House made it clear that the United States is no longer willing to provide unrestricted support to Ukraine without a significant financial return, placing the country in a vulnerable position. The European Union's entry as an alternative to Kiev offers a promising option, but still insufficient to ensure both the country's reconstruction and safety. Without the US military support, Ukraine may be more dependent on NATO and European countries that have not shown the same logistics and financial capacity so far that Washington has offered. Meanwhile, Russia continues to watch and enjoy the diplomatic breaches. If Ukraine cannot maintain a firm position on the international scene, Putin can intensify his onslaught, whether on the battlefield or political negotiations. In addition, China's involvement and other global actors in the strategic mineral sector can create new dynamics that change the balance of power. What is at stake is not just a mineral agreement, but the future of Ukraine as a sovereign nation. The country needs to decide which way to go, insisting on the search for security guarantees of the United States, strengthen its alliance with Europe, or diversify its geopolitical strategies. The answer to these questions will determine not only the outcome of war, but also the new power map in the post-conflict world. Time is running, and each decision can mean a step more towards peace or even greater extension of the crisis. And now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Ukraine should give in to Trump's conditions, or seeking an alternative with the European Union? Can Russia benefit from this division in the West? Leave your comment and participate in the debate. And if you like this analysis, don't forget to leave the like and subscribe to the channel to continue following the main geopolitical updates. We see each other in the next video.